Lumber Tycoon 2's progression sucks. In this video / proposal, I will be identifying some of the key moments that make progression so dull and tedious, and later I will be supplying my solution to these problems. The main things wrong with Lumber Tycoon 2's progression can be summed up into one concept and one word: balance. As a quick example, look at how fast a rookery axe can be obtained. It's under 30 minutes. And now look at how long it takes to get a max sawmill, a substantial amount of land, or the power to build with ease. There is no balance here. Early progression is incredibly short and skippable, while late progression is ridiculously hard for legit players. And while this isn't necessarily a bad thing for most games, Lumber Tycoon 2 just does not offer enough variety and content to make the system work. The game only has one currency, which can be produced in only one way, with really only one successful strategy, which I will discuss later. In addition to pacing, the cost versus value of most items is simply nonsensical. The player can sell a single, unmilled generic tree for over 100 money, and use that to buy a new axe or piece of land. The latter of which being the obvious choice, as for some reason the sign sells for 4 to 6 times more than the cost of the land itself. Going back to that shiny new axe, you can either buy it now for marginal gain, or go and chop one more generic tree and just skip the axe entirely. Now, don't get me wrong, choices are very good and allow progression to contort to a specific player's playing style. However, a choice like this is so inconsequential and dull that it neither teaches the player about the game or gives them more choices after acquisition. This is a very small issue though, as most people watching this probably forgot what these two axes are even named. But do you want to know what isn't a small issue? Frostwood. See, once a player reaches the point where they can begin to explore the outer reaches of the map, one major choice lies ahead of them. Volcano or Frost? Volcano is very challenging to obtain, requiring the player to complete a hard vehicle traversing course over literal lava, chopping down the very thick wood and loading it into a sawmill of equal thickness, Sawmax 01 or 02. Obtaining volcano wood is no joke. In fact, the volcano itself can be seen from the moment the player first joins, giving them a small taste of what lies ahead. Now let's look at Frostwood. To obtain Frostwood, the player must cross the bridge to purchase dynamite in a hidden outpost that is capable of exploding the Taiga's rocks. From there, the player must complete a hard vehicle traversing course, and only then can they get the Frost Tree. Unlike Lava Wood, the Frost Tree is very thin and relatively easy to chop down, even with starter axes. And that hard vehicle traversing course? Yeah, the player can just walk up it instead of driving. And it's not like a vehicle is needed up there anyways, as there's a giant ramp that can be used to send the trees all the way down to the bottom of the mountain. Frostwood is much easier to obtain and process. It can even fit in the starter sawmill. And not to mention its unique color, texture, and ability, which makes it very useful in building machinery. This wood is overpowered already, even if it was worth literally nothing. I mean, surely it's worth nothing, right? Right? Yeah, so it sells for 3 times the price of volcano wood. And believe it or not, Frost isn't the only tree like this. Spooky, Neon, and Cave Crawler are all very thick trees that are very hard to obtain and cannot be processed until the player has good equipment. And yet, they all sell for almost nothing in relation. Another balance issue is the sawmills themselves. Why are certain sawmills pointless and easily skipped over? The shabby sawmill purchased for 130 money, which is just one big generic tree, has a maximum log width of 1.4, fitting most basic trees such as generic, cherry, and birch. The next sawmill, the fair sawmill, costs 1,600 money and offers a grand total of 0.2 studs more clearance, being able to fit birch and cherry trunks. How exciting! The Sawmax 01 isn't much better, costing 11,000 and only offering a clearance of 2, giving the player access to trunks of Snow Glow, Zombie, and Palm, all of which are hard to obtain and sell for nothing in comparison to the time spent obtaining them. Because of this poor progression, it's no wonder that most players jump from the shabby sawmill all the way up to the Sawmax 02. And speaking of the Sawmax 02, why is its clearance so small? It's meant to be the endgame of sawmill progression, and yet it can barely ever fit the trunks of elusive trees such as Spooky and Cave Crawler. I guess it's fine because it's not like these rare trees sell for much anyways. Now there are many other parts of progression that are also imbalanced, such as the absurdly high cost of land, powers to build with ease, and some vehicles, all of which I have modified in this proposal. Anyways, now that we've identified the bulk of what is wrong with Lumber Tycoon 2's progression, it's time to fix it. The first thing I'm proposing is changes to the current axe progression. As mentioned before, axe progression can be easily completed, and certain axes offer no value or insights to the player based on their cost. Because of this, the first thing I'm going to change is the plain and steel axe statistics. The plain axe's cost will go from 90 to 140, damage from 0.55 to 0.4, range remains at 6 units, and cooldown decrease from 0.73 to 0.46. This ultimately changes the axe's DPS from 0.75 to 0.87. The steel axe's cost will go down from 190 to 150, its damage will go from 0.93 to 1, range from 8 back to 6, and cooldown from 0.7 to 1.1. This results in a DPS dropping from 1.33 to 0.91. I believe these changes are beneficial, as rather than the player having to skip over an axe just to reach the next tier, both axes are dropped to the same tier and teach the player about the game in doing so. If you haven't picked it up already, both these axes now have a very similar price point and DPS, with the notable change being that the plain axe now has a low damage and even lower cooldown, while the steel axe has a high damage and a high cooldown. This makes the steel axe much better at chopping thick branches and the plain axe much better at chopping thin ones. This gives the player a logical choice that teaches them that DPS isn't everything when it comes to axe statistics. The hardened and silver axes will remain the same, as they offer the player enough value already. However, the biggest change will come with the rookery axe, with its cost in terms of items required going from 7,601 to 16,405. To compensate for this higher price, the axe now has 1.8 damage instead of 1.68, a range of 10 instead of 9, and a cooldown of 0.36 instead of 0.4. This brings its DPS from 4.2 to 5, making it the second strongest axe in the game, only just behind the Maniacs. This change will make legit players able to obtain an axe on par with the Maniacs and not have to rely on trading in a broken economy. With these buffs also come buffs to the End Times axe, which are on screen now. The only drawback with making the rookery axe so powerful is the gap formed between the silver and rookie. My fix to this is a brand new axe, the Mosaic axe. Sold in the fine art shop for 4,670, this axe has the stats of the old rookery axe with an increased range. By adding this axe, the player has more of a reason to explore the tropics, giving them a high reward for their time. Moving on to trees, there are lots of little changes not worth fully explaining, so I'll speed through them now. Generic's price slightly decreased as it's a very thin tree, in turn slowing down the speed of initial progression slightly. Oak is now worth more as it's a very thick tree. Cherry and birch are both decreased in price as they are very thin and only require starting equipment. The lone cave tree is substantially nerfed due to the already ambiguous nature of obtaining it, and it being an economy exclusive wood. And finally, the sign's yield is decreased by half. Getting into the bigger changes, frost is now 32 per unit instead of 106, both due to its non-challenging method of obtaining, and its other interesting properties. Cave crawler has been buffed substantially, with plank values going from 35 to 96, giving players an actual reason to go and harvest it. Spooky has increased from 52 to 106 per unit due to its thickness and rarity, with Spooky Neon going from 90 all the way up to 420 for the same reasons as Spooky. These tree changes should balance out progression and give players actual options for obtaining cash, as Spooky and Cave crawlers should now be viable methods. Next up is Sawmills, and I made quite a few changes to them. The shabby sawmill remains the same, as it's a good introduction to the sawmill mechanics. The fair sawmill will keep its price of 1,600, an increase from 1.6 to 2 units of clearance. The current Sawmax 01 will be discontinued, with the current Sawmax 02 being renamed to the Sawmax 01S and costing 15,800 instead of 22,500. Its clearance of 2.6 remains the same. The Sawmax 02L will now sport the name Sawmax 01, with its cost decreasing from 86,500 to 24,000, staying at a 2.6 unit clearance. Finally, a new sawmill called the Sawmax 02 will be added and cost 46,000 money, with a clearance of 3.2 units. All current fair sawmills or Sawmax 01s will be converted into the new fair sawmill, with the current Sawmax 02 turning into the Sawmax 01S and the large version turning into the Sawmax 01. Players will have to buy the new Sawmax 02 in Wood R Us. With this proposed system, every new sawmill model will increase clearance by 0.4 units, allowing for more options early in progression. This system also fixes my aforementioned issue of some trunks not fitting within the 2.6 stud clearance the current Sawmax 02 has. The new Sawmills 02 will be able to fit practically every trunk of every tree currently in the game. Vehicles will also receive some tweaks in this proposal, with the utility vehicle XL's price dropping from $5,000 to $2,000 due to its very minimal advantages over the base model. Vol's all-purpose hauler will decrease from $19,000 to $12,000 to give players easier access to a good vehicle. Ideally, another vehicle could be added to take the Vol's current place, much like with the Mosaic Axe, but unfortunately a whole new vehicle would be a lot more work than just some simple stat changes. Finally, both the small trailer and 531 hauler will have their prices decreased to $1,000 and $4,000 money respectively to better match all of the previous changes. The power to build with ease is by far the worst part of legit progression. As mentioned earlier in the video, it takes over 200 hours with the Rookery Axe to reach a 10,009,000 required for powers, and that's just on one slot. In addition to the price point, the powers also ruin blueprint management entirely. With everything costing only one unit all of the time, players don't need to put thought into how they fill blueprints or process wood. This results in a lack of creativity, as a simple 1x1 cutter is all the player needs to maximize their blueprint filling efficiency. To fix both of these problems, I propose a tiered solution with 3 stages, each costing more than the last and offering the player more of an advantage. Stage 1 would cost $3,200 money and reduce the cost of filling blueprints by 25%, meaning that a blueprint with 8 units of wood required normally would now only require 6. Stage 2 would be $66,000 and buff this 25% reduction to a 50% one, meaning that the same blueprint would now cost only 4 units. Finally, Stage 3 would cost $124,000 money and offer a 75% reduction, lowering the blueprint's cost down to 2 units. Each stage would make the player's plot appear more yellow, resulting in the current color as Stage 3's indication. The Game Pass would grant the player Stage 3's power on all of their slots. I think this solution is great, as it not only lowers the overall cost, but gives the player many choices of when they want to invest money into a new stage of powers. Now for some final adjustments. All logic items are now 50% off, making them more accessible to new players who want to mess around with logical components but don't want to waste the money to do so. Land still costs 100 money initially, however now each upgrade is 500 money more than the last, a nerf from the 3,000 it is currently. This results in a max land decrease from 900,100 to only 150,100. And that's all of my proposed balance changes. Of course, it's impossible to know if these changes will fully work without some testing, but for now I'm interested to hear all of your feedback. I'll be forwarding this video to Defaultio, and I'm hopeful that we can see some improvements to make progression better, because as of now, Lumber Tycoon 2's progression sucks.